Hey everybody, quick couple things that I forgot to mention in the introduction to this video. One, there's a couple slight audio issues throughout the course of the video due to my microphone. I've honestly been real disappointed with this one, and I'm looking into getting another microphone again. But this was already the second take of this video, and the audio issues in the first take were way worse. So I don't feel like recording the video a third time, so we're just gonna roll with this one. Other detail I want to note is that some games that I'm talking about here, I was not able to record my own footage of. So for those games, I'm going to be using footage that I got from other places on YouTube. I will make sure to clearly mark when it is the case that it is not my footage I'm using, and make sure to link, credit all the videos that I got the footage from, and include links to all those videos in the description of this video. That's all. Back to the actual video. Hello everybody, I'm Brainy Diode, and I am back to talk about every game I played for the first time in 2022. Wow, it's almost like that's the title of the video. I'm going to assume you're not interested in hearing my general musings on the year as a whole, and more importantly, I'm not interested in writing or recording my general musings on the year as a whole, so we're going to try to get rolling quickly. Yet another new format this year. I'm already not convinced I like it, but I wrote the whole script this way, so we're going to at least try it. I'm going to go over the games in the order that I played them, and then add each game to a running ranked list at the end of each entry. Don't worry if you didn't get that, I'm sure it'll make more sense as we go along. So, on that note, let's get started with Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania, Ryuga Studios, 2021. Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania is a sort of puzzle, sort of platformer, which is the logical extreme of those tilty maze puzzles. Rather than controlling the monkey you're trying to get to the goal, you instead control the orientation of gravity in the stage. I had been curious about the older Super Monkey Ball games for a few years, since learning that the more recent guardrail-riddled entries aren't really indicative of the series' roots, and that the first two games got pretty crazy sometimes. So I was really excited when this remake was announced, and I'm certainly not sorry I wound up picking it up. The people on YouTube were right. This game gets hard. My biggest problem with the game is that too many of the puzzles boiled down to don't fall off this really narrow pathway for my taste, but the puzzles about figuring out how to bend the game's physics to my needs, to do things like jumping between rings or half pipes, or navigating a spinning chessboard pattern were generally a ton of fun. I haven't dipped into the side modes too much, but I've discovered that the multiplayer billiards mode is surprisingly fun and chill, and I'm hoping to convince more folks to play it with me in the future. So let's head to the ranking board, where Super Monkey Ball Banana Mania starts off in first place. Out of 1, obviously. No More Heroes, Grasshopper Manufacture 2007. No More Heroes is an action game in which you play as dorky assassin Travis Touchdown, working his way up the ranks of the United Assassins Association in order to sleep with a woman he met at a bar. Yeah, No More Heroes is almost more of a parody of action games than an actual entry in the genre. That can be both a blessing in that it allows the story, what little there is, to get even more absurd than other members of the genre, but also a curse. I'll be honest, the battle system feels a little underbaked. It's got the spectacle part down to a T, but when other legendary entries in the genre like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry are absolutely dripping in both spectacle and substance, it leaves No More Heroes falling a little bit behind in comparison. Also, in order to challenge each new assassin, you need to make a lot of money, and to do that, you need to do some odd jobs around town. Now, I understand that this part of the game is probably supposed to be a bit monotonous, but that doesn't change the fact that it's, you know, a bit monotonous. And that's exacerbated by the fact that you can make a lot more money taking on work as an assassin, which caused me to get burnt out on the combat system even faster. Which brings us to the boss fights against the other assassins, which are clearly intended to be the game's headliner acts. There are 3 of them that I would consider really great, but the rest ranged from mediocre to a bit annoying to me. Thankfully, the final boss of the game's true ending was the best of the bunch in my opinion, so the game does go out on a high note. The bones of a very good action game are definitely in here, and while the flesh and blood on top of them didn't quite live up to their promise, the game was solid enough to convince me to buy the sequel. So let's get to the ranking board, where No More Heroes currently sits in 2nd place. Ni no Kuni II Revenant Kingdom, Level 5 2018. Ni no Kuni II is an action RPG in which you play as young King Evan Tildrum, his bodyguard from another world Roland, yes, this is an isekai, so was the first one, and a variety of other colorful allies as Evan builds up a new kingdom after his original throne was usurped. Gonna be honest, I bought this while it was on sale before playing the first game, and if I hadn't done that, there is no way I would have played this based on my impressions of the first game. But I wound up being glad that happened. I think Ni no Kuni II is a far superior game to the original, and that really just comes down largely to the balancing. I didn't need to spend most of the second half of the game level grinding, which is very, very nice. Also, while pivoting from the creature collector style of the first game to a group of set party members does cut down on the customizability of the party, it also helps avoid the weird level resets the creatures in the first game had, and helps the battle system in general be a bit more focused. Moving now to other aspects of the game, while losing a lot of the Studio Ghibli influence on the visuals is a bit of a bummer, I think it still generally has a great look. The characters aren't the most memorable in the world, but are generally pretty pleasant, and one of the party members is a blonde nerd voiced by Adam Howden, so I am a happy man. There are 2 major alternate modes, mostly relegated to side quests, that offer an interesting little break from your usual questing. The first, Skirmishes, adds just a pinch of RTS influence in a sort of alternate battle system that lets you command an army going up against enemy forces to protect your kingdom or train with allied kingdoms. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the main battle system, but like I said, it was nice when I needed a small break. The other was a management minigame where you could build up your kingdom, upgrade buildings, delegate citizens to various tasks, and collect money and crafting resources from what you've built. This also ties into a number of side quests in which you convince a bunch of people throughout the world to make a new start in your kingdom. Think of it like a more involved version of Breath of the Wild's Terrytown. I didn't think I'd enjoy it very much, but between this and Yakuza 0, I'm gradually learning that I actually really like management games when they're side modes in other, more story-driven games. All in all, this is just a really chill, comfy RPG that doesn't do anything exceptional, but is just a generally fun time. Also, the Hydropolis theme is easily one of my favorite JRPG town themes ever, so that's cool. That all said, let's head to the ranking board, where Ni no Kuni II will, for now, come in 1st place. Manifold Garden, William Cheer Studio, 2019. Gonna be honest with you guys, I don't really feel like writing a review of Manifold Garden, so have this bad joke instead.
Hey, so what did you think of
Manifold Garden?
I have no thoughts on
Manifold Garden.
Fuck! Whoa!
You can't not have thoughts on
Manifold Garden.
Well, I just didn't think it was that remarkable. What can I say?
Anyway, here's the ranking. Manifold Garden is now in 4th place. Pokemon Legends Arceus, Game Freak 2022. Pokemon Legends Arceus is a... Hold on, do I really need to explain what a Pokemon game is? I'm going to assume I don't need to explain what a Pokemon game is. Anyway, this is a prequel to Pokemon's 4th generation, specifically Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum versions, that takes place right around when Pokemon training is first starting to become a thing. I'll be honest, I got about halfway through a fairly lukewarm to negative review of this game before I scrapped it, because, you know what? I like Pokemon Legends Arceus. I like Legends Arceus a whole lot, and it didn't feel right to spend so much time criticizing a game I had so much fun with. I like exploring the different areas and catching way too many Pokemon. I like checking off the Pokédex tasks. I like chaining the different mounts together to make it around the world quickly and smoothly. I like the quick, snappy battles and the mix-ups to the turn order system. I like discovering alpha Pokemon way higher leveled than me and trying to figure out how to sneak up on them and catch them without having to fight. And I like the battles against the totem Pokemon. I changed up my team quite a bit throughout the entire game, which I've never done in a Pokemon game before, and I think that indicates a level of both game balance and engagement in me which no other Pokemon game has been able to get. Sure, the areas feel a little bit empty and basic. Sure, the game acts like it looks a lot better than it actually does sometimes. Sure, parts of the story had slightly wonky pacing, but this is the first time I've had real, genuine fun with Pokemon since 2017, and I think that's worth celebrating. This is a darn good foundation for a new Pokemon side series, and I'm very excited to see where it goes next. Just, you know, give them enough dev time next time, alright? Let's jump to the rankings, where Pokemon Legends Arceus lands in 2nd place. Just gonna say, I wrote that review before Scarlet and Violet came out. I have some choice words for Game Freak and the Pokemon Company right now, but that game's not gonna be showing up on this list because I didn't buy it, and I didn't play it. Anyway, moving on! Bug Fables, Moonsprout Games 2019. Bug Fables is a turn-based RPG in the style of the first 2 Paper Mario games, in which you play as a trio of explorers searching for ancient artifacts across the world of Bugaria. I'll be honest, I know Bug Fables is pretty widely loved, but it didn't work for me almost at all. There's something to be said for a game in which every battle matters, but on the other hand, feeling like I'm in serious danger in every enemy encounter can get pretty exhausting, especially when each individual level up barely helps you get stronger. The story and the characters also didn't land with me either, and several months later, I can barely remember anything about either. I'm glad this game exists for all the OG Paper Mario fans who feel hung out to dry, but this one just isn't for me. Let's jump over to the ranking board, where Bug Fables will land in 5th place. One Piece Pirate Warriors 3, Omega Force 2015. You gotta grant me an indulgence every once in a while. One Piece Pirate Warriors 3 is a crossover between the Samurai Warriors series and the One Piece franchise. Think Hyrule Warriors, but with One Piece instead of Zelda. The only other Warriors game I've played the whole main campaign of is Fire Emblem Warriors, which I spoke on in this video's equivalent way back in 2019, and which left me feeling very underwhelmed. And I also played the demo for Age of Calamity, which unfortunately didn't really grab me either. So when I picked up this game on sale for cheap, I expected to find it okay at best, but honestly, I had a blast. A lot of that was very personal. I'm a huge One Piece fan. In fact, the manga is probably my favorite work of fiction, full stop. So I guess this game spoke to me on a deeper level than a franchise I have almost no connection with like Fire Emblem, or one I'm a much more casual fan of like Zelda. Unlike FE Warriors, each character in this game has a unique moveset. Sure, some of them can feel pretty similar to each other, but everyone has something to distinguish them, and I feel like almost all of them could definitely appeal to somebody, even if they didn't appeal to me specifically, which is really impressive considering just how many characters there are in this game. I wound up spending a lot of my playtime with characters I never would have expected to enjoy playing as so much, like Robin or Tashigi. And beside that, there were a ton of nice little fan-servicey touches that were really fun without being too intrusive. I still think the general Warriors feel doesn't quite live up to its potential, but this game won me over far more than I expected it to, so on the rankings, it will land in 3rd place for now. Xenogears, Squaresoft, 1998. A lot of you probably already know that I am a huge Xenoblade Chronicles fan. In fact, it's currently my favorite video game series. So, in the lead up to the release of Xenoblade 3, I decided to take a step back and look at the series' roots by playing the first game to bear the Xeno title. I figured I might not enjoy it as much as some of the Xenoblade games, but frankly, I ended up still having a lot less fun than I expected, and by the end, I was playing the game more out of a sense of obligation than anything else. I'm not sure any other game I've ever played has experienced a death by 1,000 paper cuts quite like this one does. The combat system can be tough to wrap your head around, and if it has a tutorial at all, I completely missed it. A lot of attack animations look really stunning, but they can also be quite long, and when you're seeing them over and over for the entire nearly 50-hour experience, they're going to get a little grating. There were some platforming segments scattered here and there that became really frustrating with the awkward platforming controls, and they were always in areas with random encounters that would eat away at my resources as I missed the same jump over and over. There are effectively 2 different battle systems, and characters that are good in one might not necessarily be good in the other, which is a pretty interesting idea and concept, but when combined with the fact that you can only change party members in certain specific locations, can be a bit obnoxious in practice for the few dungeons where it's not really clear which combat system you'll be using going forward. Not to mention that I got so used to the one I was using at any given time that I had a bit of trouble adjusting for the first couple fights almost every time I switched over to the other. The story, which I expected to be the game's saving grace for me, considering how much I love the Xenoblade stories, was muddled by what was either a subpar localization by today's standards, or just a flat-out awkward script. So much so that by the last third of the game, I was having a great deal of trouble following what was going on. And we're just not going to talk about how what was clearly supposed to be the entire second half of the game got cut down to a bunch of narration set over mostly still images with a handful of boss fights thrown in. I don't hate Xenogears. On the contrary, I have immense amounts of respect for it. It spawned my favorite video game series, and I could point to a lot of elements that clearly got repurposed for Xenoblade. The game does actually look pretty darn good most of the time, and apparently there was a lot about it that was fairly revolutionary for JRPGs of its time. This is certainly not a game I regret having played, but it is also not one that I particularly enjoyed, or that I can see myself returning to maybe ever. That said, let's head to the rankings, where Xenogears will unfortunately fall in 8th place. We have now reached just shy of the halfway point of the list, and since this new format doesn't really allow for leading up to a big grand finale, I'm going to take a brief break here to talk about the game demos I played in the past year. World's End Club. I had such high hopes for a game directed by the creator of Danganronpa, but holy crap, was this so much blander than I expected. I will not be playing the full game. Monster Hunter Stories 2. This demo is genuinely a big part of what convinced me to give turn-based RPGs another shot. As of recording, I have just finished the full game. Voice of Cards, The Isle Dragon Roars. It's a Yoko Taro game, of course I'm going to play the full version. Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. I've never played a Ys game, and this demo has not convinced me to change that. I will not be playing the full game. Time Lie. Puzzle games tend to be a bit hit or miss for me, and while I think the premise of this game is really cool, I think it's going to be a miss. I will not be playing the full game. Spiritfarer. This game seems really cool for the Life Sim audience, but I am unfortunately not part of the Life Sim audience. I will not be playing the full game. Ghost Runner. This was way too difficult for me with a controller, and I'm not huge on first-person games in general. I will not be playing the full game. Say No More. This game is extremely cute, and I could definitely see myself enjoying it, but it's low priority for me right now. I may play the full game eventually. Inscription. I thought the demo was just alright, but I hear most of the game's best stuff happens later on, so I'm just not sure how good of a look at the game I actually got. I may play the full game. Tales of Arise. Once again, the demo was just alright. I may play the full game, but I don't see that happening anytime particularly soon. And that's all the demos. Back to the main list. Yooka-Laylee, Platonic Games 2017. Yooka-Laylee is a 3D platformer in which you play as the lizard Yuka and the bat Laylee on an adventure to recover the MacGuffin stolen by the evil capital B. This is a spiritual successor to Banjo-Kazooie with a lot of overlap in the creative team, and I've always heard really good things about the first two Banjo-Kazooies, though I've never played either. I heard mixed reviews of this one, but I got it for free and decided to try it out. Yeah, gotta say, I was pretty disappointed. Compared to a lot of my favorite 3D platformers, this lacks the satisfying movement of A Hat in Time, the intricate level design of Super Mario Galaxy, the constant drive to improve of Sonic Generations, or the constant variety of Super Mario Odyssey, leaving it feeling like it lacks an identity of its own. This is really exemplified in the first 3 worlds of the game, which had some of the most generic platformer theming I've ever seen. And when 3 out of 5 worlds are really dumb in terms of theming, that's a real bummer. Besides that, Yuka and Laylee just weren't all that fun to play as. They didn't feel bad or anything, just very bland. That's probably how I would describe the whole game. Bland. Nothing particularly egregious, but all around really forgettable, and that's arguably even worse. So let's head to the ranking, where Yooka-Laylee will land in 6th place. Atelier Riser, Ever Darkness and the Secret Hideout. Gust 2019. Atelier Riser is a JRPG about a young woman named Ryza and her preparations to defend her hometown from an oncoming demon invasion. This is less of an RPG with a robust crafting system, and more of a crafting system with an RPG to justify it. That's not to say that the RPG mechanics are bad necessarily. I actually ended up quite enjoying the battle system, but you can definitely tell where the game's priorities lie. There's a ton of different materials to collect, a ton of ways to collect them, and a ton of different things to use them on, and the crafting can get pretty interesting with mechanics like recipe morphs. The crafting tutorials weren't great, so at the start I was pretty lost, but I started to enjoy it a lot more once I actually figured it out. Unfortunately, crafting systems don't tend to be my favorite game mechanics, so by the end of the game, I was back to getting through the crafting as quick as possible to get back to the other parts of the game that I liked more. The late game also pushes you to grind a lot for rarer materials to have strong enough equipment for the final dungeon, In this game, improving equipment is a much faster way to get stronger than leveling up. And that sort of grinding is really something that turns me off from a game. So, I didn't like the crafting at the beginning or the end, but I had fun with it in the middle. But the middle is unfortunately where the weaknesses of the RPG side of the game start to show themselves. The battle system is a lot of fun, but the locations you explore, the NPCs you interact with, and the side quests you can tackle are all on the bland side. There's very little world building outside of the main story as far as I can tell, and that main story itself never gets much better than adequate. There's a strong foundation here, but little built on top of it. I know this game has one sequel released, with a second possibly out by the time this video goes up, so I hope they improve on the formula this game sets, but it wasn't strong enough of an impression for me to want to play more Atelier, at least for a while. By the way, easily some of the worst video game water I've ever seen, which is odd considering how much of the plot centers around water. Just thought I'd throw that out there. Anyway, let's head to the rankings, where Atelier Riser, Everdarkness, and the Secret Hideout will land in 4th place. Ori and the Blind Forest, Moon Studios 2017. Ori and the Blind Forest is a Metroidvania, action, puzzly platformer, in which you play as the spirit Ori on a journey to restore the elements that keep the forest alive. I don't really want to write this review because everybody else liked this game and I didn't, but backing out of 2 reviews in a video that's already probably going to be a bit shorter than most others like it I've done feels wrong, so let's keep this brief, okay? The game looks really pretty, and I like the save system a lot, but I thought the combat sucked, and I didn't enjoy exploration. I got lost way too often, and that made me fight even more enemies with the combat system I really didn't like, and I just didn't have fun with it. That's pretty much all there is to say. Maybe if I played it again with a better idea of the world's layout, I would enjoy it more, but I don't really want to revisit it right now. Ori and the Blind Forest is going to land in 7th place. Rez Infinite, Enhanced Games 2016, Remaster of Rez, United Game Artists 2001. Rez Infinite is a rail shooter, I guess, in which I'm pretty sure you play as a hacker trying to bring down an AI that has taken over the government. I'm really not super clear on the details. I kind of figured Manifold Garden would be my obligatory really weird game of the year this time around, but then I played this one and I just... how do I even describe Rez Infinite? Just look at what's going on screen. This isn't a rhythm game, but after you've locked on, all your attacks fire in rhythm to the music, making this another one of those elusive games about music that aren't rhythm games that I keep coming back to. It seems pretty easy starting out, but later levels, and especially later boss fights, can get really intense. Combine that with the striking visual style, and I guess all I can say is that while I don't tend to care a lot for games of this genre, I got really swept up in the spectacle of it all, and ended up enjoying this game way more than I expected to. And so, Rez Infinite will take the 5th place spot. Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection, Capcom 2020. Remasters of the Mega Man Zero series, Inti creates 2002 to 2005, and the Mega Man ZX series, Inti creates 2006 to 2007. The Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection is a collection of the Mega Man Zero and Mega Man ZX games. Wow, what a surprise! Mega Man Zero 3 was actually one of the first handheld games I ever owned back in elementary or middle school, so my decision to play out this collection was driven in large part by a desire to go back and finish an unfinished game that has hung over my head for so many years. This game is astounding, amazing, truly incredible. I am taken aback, flabbergasted, some other term for surprised. If I made it through a play session without my opinion on what was going on ever getting above, this is fine, I would never go below that either. But if I ever, and I mean ever, started thinking, yeah, this game is actually really good, I could almost guarantee that I would end up turning off the game in a rage that same session because of some fresh, new, near inexcusable bullshit thrown directly into my face. I have never had a gameplay with my emotions this hard before. I felt like I was being gaslit. It was remarkable. Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection, 10 million out of 10. That's not a review score, that's how many feet I recommend you stay away from this game at minimum. With that rapid bait and switch where I kept sounding like I'm starting to praise the game, only to pull the rug out from under you with another insult, I hope I've given you some small taste of what my experience with this game was like. I eventually dropped it completely when I really thought the ZX games were going to be better than the Zero games, only to come face to face with a boss whose hitbox I just could not figure out. That's right, I didn't finish the game, but I played it for over 30 hours, and that's much, much more than enough for me. The Mega Man Zero ZX Legacy Collection takes last place, where it will remain for the rest of this video. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Monolith Soft 2022. And our whiplash of the day, we're going straight from my least favorite game I played this year to my favorite. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is an action JRPG in which you play as a group of 6 soldiers brought together from 2 warring nations as they come to respect and eventually care for each other, uncover a worldwide conspiracy, and eventually put an end to their eternal war. Do you ever boot up a game and you can already tell from the title screen alone that it's going to be a masterpiece? I'm obviously very biased by my love for this series, but that's the experience I had with this game. Say what you will about the Nintendo Switch and its graphical shortcomings, but I would honestly consider this the prettiest game I've ever played, and the soundtrack is astounding as always. And we haven't even gotten past the title screen. The combat has been expanded from 1 and streamlined from 2, cribbing a lot of the best aspects from both and leaving a lot of the flack behind. You can also fluidly switch which party member you're controlling mid-battle for the first time in the series, which adds another level of depth to the system. Or, if you're me, just means there's always a new button you can be pressing to do something cool. It does take a while to get going, but once it does, it's just so dang satisfying. And don't even get me started on the absolutely fantastic new chain attack system. As for the story, it's a bit on the basic side, and you can generally tell where it's going in broad strokes, but there absolutely are some surprises here and there, and it's really elevated by the characters that I really grew to love by the end, and who are the reason this game became the second game ever to make me cry. I remember folks being worried pre-release that the world would seem empty of NPCs because of the nations being structured in colonies, and because the main cast are on the hit list of both nations, but I'm glad to report that this is not the case. Sure, the colonies aren't nearly as big or dense as the population centers in the first 2 games, but that's made up for the fact that there are a lot of them. And the fact that your first quest involving each colony usually ends in you liberating it from the oppressive rule of the nation it belongs to sidesteps the whole party is full of fugitives issue nicely, and also makes the colony's commander indebted to you, meaning they can join you as an optional 7th party member called a hero, and your core 6 can make use of that hero's class. On that note, this is probably my favorite roster of side quests I've ever been presented with, and probably my favorite roster of side characters as well. I actually remember stuff about a good handful of random side quests and random quest givers months after having played the game last, which is not something I can say for pretty much any other game in the genre. There are some issues, sure. A few members of the main cast took a bit longer than I would have liked to grow on me. The world isn't quite as fun to explore as the previous entries. I definitely miss the living continents angle the first two games had, and the combat system feels a bit more like a grab bag of cool mechanics than especially 2's elegant build-up towards a single explosive chain attack. Yes, I'm probably the first person you've ever heard call Xenoblade 2's combat elegant, but I'll save explaining why for another time. And I didn't feel like it quite pays off its marketing as the conclusion of the series' first saga, at least before the last wave of DLC comes out. But those are all very minor gripes in the face of what is otherwise a triumph of game design. You may think I'm exaggerating a bit here, but I really fell in love with this game in a way I haven't since I first played Yakuza 0 back in 2019, which may only be 3 years ago, but I've played a lot of games since then. This is not only my favorite game I played in 2022, it's easily a member of my all-time top 10, and I'm incredibly excited to see what the upcoming DLC campaign brings to the table. Equally exciting is the fact that the opening cutscene establishes that the Xenoblade multiverse includes much more than just the 3 universes we've seen in the series thus far, which throws the door wide open for future games to go in wild new directions. And according to this game's director, future games are more of a question of when than a question of if. People may be starting to get tired of multiverses these days, but for me, Xenoblade 3 is proof that my favorite game series could not be in safer, more capable hands, so I am very excited to see what that concept has to bring to the series. Still wish I could have gotten myself a special edition though. Let's head to the board, where Xenoblade Chronicles 3 will take first place. Zero Escape, The Nonary Games, Spike Chunsoft 2017. Remasters of 9 Hours, 9 Persons, 9 Doors, Spike Chunsoft 2009. And Zero Escape, Virtue's Last Reward, Spike Chunsoft 2012. Zero Escape, The Nonary Games, is a collection of 2 visual novel puzzle games in which you play as one of 9 people kidnapped and forced to play through a series of puzzle rooms to escape. If you're familiar with Danganronpa, think of it like Danganronpa, but it takes itself a bit more seriously, and instead of solving murder mysteries, you're doing escape rooms. It's even made by the same studio. I'm a fairly big fan of the Danganronpa games myself, as you may have figured out by the previous year's lists, so I was excited to try this series out, but unfortunately it didn't quite live up to my expectations. The puzzles for the most part ranged from decent to actually pretty satisfying to solve, but the biggest failing of both games lies in the characters. A lot of the reason I like Danganronpa so much is because every game has incredibly well fleshed out characters with very strong and memorable character dynamics, both with the player character and with each other, and I just don't think you get that with Zero Escape. These characters are in crisis mode constantly, in a way that doesn't really let you explore who they are as people deeply enough for me. The second game especially was placing time limits on basically every single action the characters took, except solving the puzzles, which is the only time you're fully in control. And then the characters constantly ignored those time limits until the last second for what I often felt like were really contrived reasons. Your story can't be high tension permanently. If it is, the audience will acclimate to that, and then that high tension will feel a lot less high tension than you want it to. Then there's the issue of how each game handled their multiple endings. The first game had a limited number of branching paths in the early game, and as far as I could tell, you're required to restart the game every single time you want a new ending on the save file, which means you're going to be playing through the first few rooms several times to get every ending. The second game had some clever methods of sidestepping this and only requiring you to play through each room once, but it came with its own issue. namely a prisoner's dilemma style minigame after each room in which you must choose to ally with or betray another character you went through the room with. If you want the true ending, you'll eventually have to pick both options for quite a few of these interactions, which means you'll often be forced to be a jerk to another character and have them be a jerk to you in turn. That's a big reason why, even if I did have the chance to dig deeper into these characters' lives, I'm not sure I would want to. And that, I think, is one of the greatest failings a game like this can have. Based on what I've seen of these two, I'm not necessarily opposed to the idea of trying the first game, especially since the second ends on a big cliffhanger, but I've also heard it's the worst of the bunch, so we'll see. That all said, let's check the board, where Zero Escape the Nonary games will come in 9th place. Sentinels Aegis Rim, Vanillaware 2019. And so we come to the penultimate game of this year's list, and possibly the most difficult one for me to talk about. 13 Sentinels is part visual novel, part real-time strategy game about a group of high schoolers becoming the pilots of giant mechs called Sentinels to defend the planet from alien invasion. I feel like that description makes the story sound incredibly straightforward, when in reality this is one of the least straightforward stories I've ever seen in a video game, but the online community around this game generally agrees that it's best to go in knowing as little as possible, so I'll leave the plot description there. To quote a friend of mine, it's the kind of game where every time you think you know what's going on, something happens that throws everything out the window. The reason I'm having difficulty talking about it is because I thought it was good, but I thought it was just good. Whereas almost everyone else seems to be calling it an absolute masterpiece. I think my biggest problem was just how complex the story can get. Each one of the 13 Sentinel pilots has their own plotline that overlaps with at least a few of the others, and it's often not clear when these storylines are taking place relative to each other, and, for most of the game, relative to the RTS segments. And I'll admit that I was just really lost for most of the runtime, which definitely hampered my enjoyment. Now, this is probably my fault, at least in part. Each pilot's story is broken into segments, and you're able to pick almost any pilot to follow at almost any time. I get the sense that the intent was to follow a single pilot's story as far as possible, until I hit a point where I was required to see a certain event in another pilot's story to proceed, but instead, every time I was able to choose a character, I picked the character with the lowest completion percentage, so I really had to keep all 13 stories straight in my mind at once. Regardless of my degree of self-sabotage, I honestly feel the story could have been bolstered by cutting a small handful of protagonists. While for the most part they did a good job of keeping the storylines surprisingly distinct for each other, there were a couple that just kind of blended into each other. Also, there were some protagonists that I just straight up didn't like, but that's just personal taste. The protagonists I did like, I actually wound up getting pretty invested in, and I had way more fun with the RTS parts than I expected to, so that kept me enjoying the game until the credits rolled. As is, I would call 13 Sentinels a solid 7 or 8 out of 10, but given how many people have been calling this a masterpiece, there's a good chance you'll like it more than I did. So let's head to the rankings, where 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim will land in 5th place. Persona 5 Royal, Atlas 2019. Well, that's where this video was originally going to end, but I decided to sneak one more on here because even though I didn't finish it until nearly 2 weeks into January, it's the only thing I played for the last month and a half of the year, and it also lets me end the video on a high note. Persona 5 Royal is a turn-based JRPG mixed with a social sim, in which you lead the Phantom Thieves, a group of teenagers who find themselves able to enter a cognitive realm full of the palaces of those with evil, twisted desires in their hearts, and use this power to change the hearts of the corrupt adults around them. I really enjoyed Persona 5 Royal. Although the story may have seemed close to falling apart at times, the main cast and many of the side characters were incredibly endearing, and this is easily my favorite turn-based battle system I've ever come across. Mechanics like Baton Pass, which lets you grant an extra turn to a party member after hitting an enemy weakness, and Technicals, which basically add an extra weakness to enemies inflicted with status conditions, built on each other in really exciting ways that made me feel really awesome when I managed to cash in on a massive chain of damage I'd built up in a short amount of time. Add that to the insane visual flair every aspect of this game is oozing with, and you have a tremendously fun battle system that managed to carry this behemoth of a finish time without getting stale. But that's not to say that that's the only part of the game that shines. I loved the social sim aspect way more than I expected to after playing Catherine. Throughout the game, you'll meet a number of characters called confidants, who, by getting to know them, will grant you new skills and abilities to use in the game's dungeons, incentivizing you to get as close as possible to as many of them as possible, even if you aren't interested in their personal storylines. But to be clear, I was invested in most of their personal storylines. My one major complaint with the Confidant system is that most of the time you spend with them is just the silent protagonist and one confidant. I felt like I got to know everybody individually pretty well, but I wish I could have gotten to see more interactions between characters, especially those in the main party, with each other rather than just the protagonist. The party itself can start to feel a bit bloated in the game's second half, and when most of what you see of them are either one-on-ones with the protagonist or the entire group together in one place, individual character dynamics can start to get covered up later on. Those are small complaints though. All in all, the social sim aspect was very well fleshed out and integrated with the dungeon crawling side much more coherently than I expected. Persona 5 Royal was a really fantastic experience, and one I'm tremendously glad to have closed the year out with. So, one last time this year, let's head to the ranking where Persona 5 Royal will land in second place out of 17. And that is it for the gaming I did in 2022. I decided not to talk about Final Fantasy X year because I'm going to sum up my thoughts on it in the last episode of that series, but other than that, now you know generally what I was up to this past year in terms of gaming. My backlog has really blown up this year, so I'm sure I'll have lots of interesting stuff to share next winter. As far as this channel goes, I'm currently preparing to share a lot of really exciting stuff with you guys, so I hope you're excited for what's in store moving forward. That all said, I've been Brainy Diode, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you again soon.